classmates. I'm going to talk to you about functional behavior assessment today, which corresponds with chapter 24 in the textbook for this class. Some of the questions and topics that I'll be going over today are: what is functional behavior assessment? What is the role of functional behavior assessment in planning and monitoring behavior interventions? What are the different methods of functional behavior assessment? And what does the process look like for conducting a functional behavior assessment? The definition of functional behavior assessment is a systematic method of assessment for obtaining information about the purposes or functions a problem behavior serves for a person. The results of FBA are used to guide the design of an intervention for decreasing the problem behavior and for increasing appropriate behavior. Why should we use functional behavior assessment to inform interventions? FBA is more durable, more likely to be reinforcement-based, and more effective than regular trial and error procedures. FBA also reduces the risk of unintended development of additional problem behaviors by addressing reinforcing functions of problem behavior. Also, FBA helps us to avoid using default technologies with our students. Default technologies is a term referring to the use of intrusive, coercive, or punishment-based interventions. According to a quote on page 503 of our textbook, preventative efforts should be directed toward modifying instructional environments, such as providing more frequent reinforcement for desirable behavior, opportunities for breaks, or means to request and obtain help with difficult tasks, so that they are less likely to serve as sources of aversive stimulation, motivating operations for escape. As trained professionals, we should aim to prevent new behaviors from escalating to problematic levels. When we notice that settings or demands are aversive to our students, we should make sure we are providing adequate reinforcement whenever the students are behaving appropriately. Or we should lower our expectations until students have learned how to meet them. Functional behavior assessment aims to discover what reinforces or maintains the problem behavior of this particular individual. Understanding what maintains the behavior is very useful in understanding what function the behavior serves. A problem behavior may be maintained by positive reinforcement. Social positive reinforcement, such as attention, can be considered if the problem behavior often results in immediate reactions from others. Keep in mind that both positive attention like praise and negative attention like scolding can be reinforcing. A behavior may be maintained by tangible positive reinforcement if it often results in access to reinforcing materials or stimuli. Behaviors maintained by automatic positive reinforcement occur regardless of consequences. If the behavior occurs even when the child is alone, it may be automatically reinforcing. Problem behaviors may also be maintained by negative reinforcement. Social negative reinforcement, or escape, may be the function if the problem behavior often results in terminating or postponing aversive events. The behavior may be maintained by automatic negative reinforcement if the behaviors terminate aversive stimulation, such as physically painful or uncomfortable conditions. The book mentions that self-injurious behavior can sometimes be automatically reinforcing, such as scratching skin to stop an itch, even if it is severe and breaks through the skin. Three methods of functional behavior assessment are discussed in this chapter. The first is functional or experimental analysis. The second is descriptive assessment, and the third is indirect assessment. Now I will go into a little more detail about each method of FBA. In a functional analysis, antecedents and consequences representing those in the person's natural environment are arranged so that their separate effects on problem behavior can be observed and measured. This method is not conducted in the natural environment, but in a setting under complete control of the experimenter. The experimental conditions that mimic those in the natural environment are often referred to as analog conditions. The four conditions usually used in a functional analysis include contingent attention, contingent escape, alone, and a free play control condition in which the subject has non-contingent access to reinforcing objects and attention. The conditions are presented systematically, one at a time, and in an alternating sequence to identify which conditions predictably result in problem behavior. Now I will briefly describe each of the conditions and how they can help to make hypotheses about the function of problem behaviors. In the contingent attention testing condition, the student is given attention after the problem behavior occurs, and only after the problem behavior occurs. Figure 24.1 on page 505 of our textbook shows elevated behaviors in the contingent attention condition. You can see in the figure that the behavior occurred more in the contingent attention condition than in any other condition. When problem behaviors are most frequent in contingent attention conditions, the most probable motivating operation for the behavior is positive reinforcement. The student is more likely to repeat the behaviors if it is followed by attention. In the contingent escape condition, the subject is continuously presented with task demands and prompts. The student is given a break from the task only after the target behavior occurs. When the frequency of the behavior is highest in the contingent escape condition, it is most likely maintained by negative reinforcement. This subject is more likely to repeat a behavior that is followed by a break from the task demands. In the alone condition, the student is left without materials or environmental stimulation. In this condition, any occurrence of problem behavior is ignored or neutrally redirected. If the behavior occurs most frequently in the alone condition, it is likely that the behavior is automatically reinforcing, and further assessment may be needed to determine which type of automatic reinforcement maintains the behavior. If there is no clear pattern of the behavior's occurrence, like in this figure, no conclusions can be made without further assessment. It is possible that the behavior is automatically reinforced if it occurs across settings, regardless of differing antecedents and consequences. The next type of FBA method is descriptive assessment. Descriptive assessment consists of direct observation of target behavior in the natural setting. Descriptive assessment is a more convenient method to use in the school because it does not involve changing the student's regular routine and activities, making it less intrusive than functional analysis. Descriptive assessment is often used in schools, where interventionists observe the behavior in relation to events. The observer records what happens before and after the problem behavior and looks for a pattern. By documenting which events predictably precede and follow the behavior, hypotheses can be made about its function. The data may suggest whether motivating operations are attention, escape, or automatic, for example. Descriptive assessment is a slightly different method for collecting the same information sought in a functional analysis, the difference being that it occurs in a natural rather than contrived setting. ABC continuous recording is when an observer records occurrences of target problem behaviors and selected events in the natural routine during a period of time. The picture shown is part of figure 24.2 on page 507 of the textbook. You can see here that the data is taken each time a targeted event happens, which may also function as an antecedent for the target behavior. The data taken through ABC continuous recording show occasions where the target behavior did not occur. This allows for the calculation of conditional probabilities. Conditional probability is the likelihood that a target behavior will occur in a given circumstance. The closer the conditional probability is to 1, the stronger the correlation between the target behavior and a particular consequence. This can help to determine the strength of hypothesized functions of behavior during analysis of continuous data. See page 508 for the information on how to calculate and use conditional probabilities and the limitations associated with them. Another form of descriptive assessment is ABC narrative recording. In ABC narrative recording, data is taken only when target behaviors occur. I've actually seen many of examples of ABC narrative recording and was involved in taking data this way while I was working as a paraprofessional. I remember the data sheet that was meant to be filled out consistently by whomever was working with the student when the problem behavior occurred, which in this case was running out of the classroom. In practice, it was not very effective in helping to plan the intervention. Staff members inconsistently filled out the chart, and many of the recorded observations were written subjectively, without reference to the actual behaviors observed. I remember seeing lots of pages where antecedents were left completely blank, and the data ended up being really pretty useless. And the textbook warns that this method can elicit subjective impressions rather than objective data from some staff. The textbook also points out that narrative recording is limited and that it might identify functional relations that do not exist, because the data is only recorded when the target behaviors occur. It is suggested that ABC narrative recording works best for gathering preliminary information to inform other assessment methods. Another type of descriptive assessment, scatter plots, can be used to determine the particular times in which the behavior occurs more often than others. Indirect assessment methods can be used to obtain information from persons who are familiar with the person exhibiting the problem behavior. Examples of indirect assessment include structured interviews, checklists, rating scales, and questionnaires. These methods can be used to identify possible environmental events that correlate with problem behaviors. Indirect assessment methods are useful for gaining information that can be used in guiding other assessments. There are many limitations, however, of indirect assessment, and they cannot provide strong evidence for functional relations on their own. Now that we have gone over the different methods used, we will now go over the specific steps of conducting a functional behavior assessment. Step 1 is to gather information through indirect and descriptive assessments. In this phase, you should interview parents, teachers, and/or caregivers. Prepare for direct observations, identify and define target problem behaviors, conduct observations, and organize your data in a scatter plot. The next step in conducting a functional assessment is interpreting information and formulating hypotheses regarding possible functions of the target problem behavior. Think about whether the behavior serves the function of attention or escape, or is automatically reinforcing. Write your hypotheses in antecedent behavior consequence format. Remember that behaviors may serve multiple functions, and that different topographies of problem behavior may also serve different functions. The next step is to test your hypotheses using functional analysis. The brief procedure can be used most of the time in the school setting because it is pretty reliable and takes less time. The brief procedure can be conducted as follows. First, implement one session each of the control and each test condition. Second, look for an increased rate of target problem behavior under certain conditions. Third, reinstate your test conditions of escalated behavior. Fourth, implement a contingency reversal session in which substitute replacement behaviors are introduced. And finally, reinstate the test condition one more time. Figure 24.3 on page 513 shows hypothetical data from a brief functional analysis. The number of problem behavior occurrences is recorded in each of the 4 test conditions. The behavior occurs most frequently in the contingent escape condition, so a contingency reversal of that condition is conducted. The contingency reversal includes reinstating the contingent escape condition, then a contingency reversal condition in which a replacement behavior, such as signing for a break, is followed by escape, and then the contingent escape condition one more time. The data in this chart provides strong evidence that this behavior is in fact maintained by escape. Kong and Iwata found that brief functional analysis is only accurate in about 66% of cases. Therefore, if plenty of time and resources are available, using extended analysis is safer. If the brief analysis is inconclusive, you may need to use an extended analysis. After testing your hypotheses, you should be ready to develop an appropriate and effective intervention that is based on the function of the problem behavior, making them functionally equivalent to problem behavior. For example, if a student has tantrums that are maintained by attention, the intervention should provide another way for the student to access that attention. Functional behavior assessments help us to identify the specific antecedents triggering behavior, the behavioral deficits that can be addressed through intervention, reinforcement contingencies that can be altered, and what is reinforcing to our student. Now we will discuss some possible interventions. You may be able to change the setting of the antecedent condition to decrease probability of the problem behavior. For example, if a student has tantrums when asked to wash their hands before lunch, the behavior may be avoided if she is instead prompted to wash her hands before recess. You may be able to teach new replacement behaviors that result in the same outcome, such as teaching a student to request a break appropriately rather than running out of a classroom. You may decide to alter consequences of the behavior so that reinforcement is no longer provided. Functional behavior assessment is not complete once the intervention is developed. You must continue to monitor the behavior to make sure the intervention is working. Remember that functions of behaviors change over time, and additional functional behavior assessments may be necessary. Thanks for listening. I hope this presentation has helped you to understand functional behavior assessment. I look forward to our discussion on Blackboard. Feel free to continue to work through the practice questions in the next slides.